Hey, welcome back. You're in the C Space Studio here at CES 2023. I'm James Kotecki, joined by Jeff Jury, Senior VP and General Manager, Connected Car, Xperi. Welcome back to the C Space Studio. You joined us last year. We're glad to have you back.
Yes, glad to be here.
Before we talk about your brand specifically, I wonder if you can just kind of start with a macro level, just give us some context kind of about the mobility space in general. What's your kind of general sense, snapshot about how people are moving around here as we enter 2023?
And so we're seeing quite a bit of this idea of, what's mobility mean in the future and what's really going to be different about it than the past.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, from a vehicle, looking at cars, looking at motor vehicles, we see a lot of personalization coming into play, where you're going to be looked at going into the car and saying, how do I make this vehicle more personalized for my experience? A lot of the trends in the past were how do you do ride shares and things like that. Yeah. But we actually think the personalization is where the future is. How do I make this experience just about me?
Is the personalization then still tied to a car that I own, you're saying?
I believe so. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be. You could say, bring your profile in, and we have technologies now, you identify the person and you bring their profile up. Mm-hmm. But typically, cars are an extension of the individual. Most people buy a car based on their personality, less so than just what gets me from point A to point B. So I still think this idea of ownership and having your own personal space is still very important.
So tell me what Xperi is doing with Connected Car overall. Can you now give us the snapshot of the different kinds of products and technologies that you're working with?
Yeah, so we're looking at immersive entertainment in the vehicle, and that also includes safety. Because when we talk about creating a more immersive experience for the driver and the passengers, you also have to have a nod towards safety. How do you combine the two together? Because from our perspective, we've done a lot of research and we say, people love how they live in their home and they're comfortable in the office, but we have this third space, which is the car. Yeah. And how do you create a better, more immersive experience for everyone in the car?
So let's talk about that a little bit, because are you envisioning a world of driverless cars? Is that kind of a given to you, where we're all going to be in this pod together watching a movie or something like that, or does your vision not necessarily require that to happen?
Not quite. I believe full autonomy is pretty far off for the average car. Yeah. But you can have driver assistance that goes on. Now you're starting to see that in cars now. And as cars become more, I guess, safer with level 2, 3 autonomy, then the idea about what is the entertainment experience can increase. You can have a more immersive experience. So they go hand in hand, but we don't envision with our products that we get to full autonomy for quite a while.
And I imagine that the entertainment experience, when it comes to the driver, certainly can include immersive audio and things like this. But when you look at it visually, could that eventually, and maybe it is now, looking at things like augmented reality, where can you make driving more fun visually? Is that a good idea from a safety perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Like, how do you make it fun for the driver while maintaining safety?
Make it fun for it to be safe,
Right, that's right. Yeah, and I think you can see some augmented reality potentially coming in there, particularly with heads-up displays. Where we're focused right now is a step before that, which is video. A lot of people would say, we can't put video in the front seat of the front dash of a car, but actually you can. And there's ways to do it that it's clearly safe for the, obviously the passenger. There's also a way to do it for the driver where if they look away for too long, maybe you shut down that video. But to us, the entertainment suite is not just about audio in the car, it's about audio and video.
Got it. And so is the video that you're envisioning something that the driver would occasionally glance at, or is it really about the person in the passenger seat in that case?
No, I think
primarily?
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that you're going to have video in the car for the driver. You actually see it in some other countries today. Now, obviously, you have to take safety into account. Yeah. Because obviously, you can't have anyone wrecking. But at the same time, this idea of video is so powerful in the vehicle. I think you're going to see it for all the passengers and the driver.
Are we seeing content that is being custom created for this very particular environment? Especially, I can imagine, if I knew that my content was primarily being viewed by a couple who were driving somewhere, then I might create it with, for it to be, viewable by the passenger, but then also you don't have to be watching it, you can just listen to it and also understand it if you're occasionally glancing at it. Do we see custom content coming in just for this kind of experience?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think you will see that because it's a great application. And if you think of if you watch a movie at home, you might not have 2 hours in the car, but that doesn't mean you might not be able to see a synopsis. Right. Or maybe it's just shorts that relate to that movie. Yeah. And that whole idea of if you can determine that the average couple was in a car for, let's say, 33 minutes, you can tailor the content to represent that experience that they have.
Do you have actually a number in mind of, there's X number of minutes that we want to be able to fill with video that people currently aren't doing that right now as they're driving around in their cars?
I wouldn't say a hard and fast number, but I would say that the average commute, if you think of it as an hour, and if you had a lot of content that was 45 minutes, 30 minutes, that probably suits a automotive environment better than say, let's do a 2-hour movie, you know, or a 6-hour miniseries.
Yeah. Do you see AI coming into play for what you're doing, especially as we look at things like generative content, things like ChatGPT, or things that create visual content? Does that play into the kind of content that you might see in cars in the future?
I think AI plays into the audio content, and I think it can play into the video content. It's an interesting idea that it goes to this idea of personalization.
Yeah.
And as the car sort of learns what you like, it could be creating some additional content that really represents what you want to see or feel or experience in the vehicle. So it's definitely a trend that we'd be looking at.
So are your customers the manufacturers themselves? Do you ever sell directly to consumers to kind of upgrade their own vehicles after they buy them?
Now, we personally don't. We work through the car companies, but that concept is definitely one that the car industry is looking at. So we can put a platform, our independent media platform, in the car, and then the car company can decide how do they want to work with the consumer on accessing that, and how do you upgrade it, right? Because with over-the-air updates, sort of a lot of things are possible that weren't possible maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, you're talking a lot about personalization, and you're obviously looking at the hardware that goes into the car to enable this, so I assume you could support a lot of different possibilities here, but what are you hearing people talk about as far as advertising in these vehicles? So if you know someone is specifically in a vehicle, and you know some personal information about them, that might change the way that you're able to target them through ads.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, there's studies in the past about advertising, been out there on TV and radio for years, that if it's an ad that you're interested in, it's not really considered advertising, right? So I think the targeted idea of personalization and targeted advertisements are definitely going to play into the future.
Yeah. As we come out of the pandemic and now here, you and I were at CES 2022, where now we're back at CES 2023, where there are more people, and it really feels like the full CES is back in full swing. But we're still kind of grappling with these uncertainties around how much people will be commuting, how many hours and days a week people will be actually working from home or working some kind of flexible hybrid environments. How does that data play into the way you see the future of mobility and the way that your technology is used?
And we started this conversation about mobility, and even if commutes are shortened, people are still traveling all over, particularly in North America, big continent. Everyone's spread out. Everyone's driving everywhere. So, you know, I think the commute, while it changes, where it goes to hybrid, it doesn't alter the fact that we're a mobile society.
Yeah. Do you see any future where the car is enabling digital health technologies to come into play?
Absolutely. It's interesting. We don't have it productized yet, but in our R&D labs, we're able to look at heart rate. We're able to look at monitoring health. And this idea, and we did some studies.
These are sensors in my seat, for example, that are detecting.
Or in the dash.
Or in the
in the dash that can read the body temperature, thermals, things like that. And we've done some studies that show that particularly millennials that are open to this idea of, oh, I'm getting a health check while I'm sitting in the car, and I'm able to. The car is saying, hey, you're in good shape, or you know, maybe you're stressed. Hey, relax. You know, it could be something as basic as that. But this idea of the car also being able to do diagnostics, basic diagnostic, it's something that's definitely in the lab, and I think you're going to start seeing it come out pretty soon.
It's so interesting, this idea of a third place, and really the definition of a car and almost the mindset of what a car is really changing, especially as we talk about things like electrification, and we talk about the car as another room, a place to get your diagnostics, but even in the future as kind of a battery that you might be able to reverse it in times of a power outage, and now you can be powering your home with the car. What's your definition of a car right now? How do you think that's changing?
I do think the car is becoming, as it always has been, a sort of extension of yourself, as I mentioned before. And now it becomes even more of a functional device that you're using for entertainment. As you said, you might be using it to power other devices. You're using it potentially for health monitoring. So as you get into mobility and you look at total mobility and the fact that you can now have a car that is, let's say, an extension of you as a person, on both a entertainment and a safety and a health environment, health basis, it really takes I guess, the definition of car out, and
Yeah.
it becomes something else.
What kind of car would be an extension of you as a person? What would be the setup if we got into that car?
Yeah, I think you'd see a lot of entertainment around things that I liked between little video clips and audio. And this idea you said about augmented reality, it might be something where I said, I'd like to see, you know, when I'm driving somewhere, I'd like to see more information about some of the points along the way that I don't know about.
We didn't talk much about the UX and the way that this is actually all being controlled. Touchscreen primarily, is that how you see the future? Voice, where do you see this
I think
going?
it's a combination of touch and voice. You know, one thing we have in our products is we have the largest collection of metadata for content in the world, and that plays very nicely into this idea that with the voice, you're going to be saying things to your car, and it's not just, you know, turn up the heat, or it might be, hey, play that movie that Tom Hanks was in the 1980s, and it brings up a list, and you say, just the comedies, and that brings that up, and say, yeah, the ones where, you know, he had a girlfriend. And then it narrows it down.
Yeah.
So you're doing all this where it's voice, and you may be pushing some buttons, but I think voice becomes a large part of it.
Does the car also then become the most sophisticated computer that I have in my house? And is there a point at which maybe I just want to have devices that are somehow connected to that instead of having, you know, all the computing power on my device individually? I can actually draw a lot of compute power from what's sitting in my garage.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think you will see that. If you look at the dollars spent on investment in vehicles today, more and more of it is just the electronics.
Yep.
So I think in the future, what you're going to have is a supercomputer. You're sitting on a supercomputer, and what else can you use that supercomputer for? And that may be the most powerful device you ever own.
Yeah, gaming, for example.
Gaming, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeff Jury, there's so much to talk about, and we're so glad to have had you back, and we hope you come back again. Jeff Jury of Xperi, thank you so much for joining us here
Thank
today.
you.
And thank you so much for joining us. You're in the C Space Studio here at CES 2023. I'm James Kotecki. Keep it here. More conversations are just ahead.